Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something pretty troubled from the past. Something powerful, violent, and deeply fascinating. The dark history of the Roman Empire. But before we get into it, what time is it where you are right now? Midnight? 3 a.m.? Are you already in bed, lights off, headphones in, trying to sleep? Good, because this one's going to take you far away from your day. So close your eyes. And let's go back in time to a place where power ruled everything except peace. So let us embark on a journey through the vast and ponderous expanse of the Roman Empire, an empire that stretched across dusty plains, rocky hills, and the edges of forgotten seas. Its history is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, betrayal, and an astonishing amount of administrative paperwork. Tonight, we shall wander through its darker corners, not with haste or excitement, but with the deliberate plodding rhythm of a scribe recording tax ledgers. Picture a high contrast scene, flat and stark, drawn in a medieval Roman style with thick black outlines against a crisp white background. Roman senators clad in flowing togas of muted ochre and olive tones stand in a shadowy marble hall. Their faces, expressive yet weary in a vintage educational folk art style, are etched with lines of worry, their eyes darting as they whisper secrets that history has long since buried. The hall is cold, its columns looming, their surfaces cracked and worn, as if sighing under the weight of centuries. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the heavy mantle of history settle over you, lulling you toward a gentle calm. We begin with the Senate, the beating heart of Roman politics, though perhaps not as thrilling as one might imagine. The Senate was a place of endless discussions, of men in togas debating matters both grand and mundane: grain supplies, road repairs, the alignment of aqueducts, and the occasional accusation of treason. Visualize a high contrast illustration, a dimly lit chamber with thick black outlines framing every detail. The senators, their togas draped in muted browns, grays, and dull greens, stand in clusters, their faces drawn with exaggerated expressions of concern or boredom, as if posing for an ancient educational scroll. One senator, let us call him Lucius Cornelius Marcellus, leans forward, his whisper barely audible over the flicker of oil lamps that cast long, moody shadows. He speaks of a plot, perhaps involving a rival senator or a provincial governor, but the details are mired in minutiae, names of minor officials like Quintus Fabius, dates of forgotten meetings in 137 BCE, and the precise wording of a decree about olive oil tariffs. The Senate, you see, was not always a place of decisive action. More often, it was bogged down in bureaucracy, with scrolls piling high on marble tables, each one detailing grain shipments, military budgets, or the maintenance schedules for Rome's sprawling roads. Picture those scrolls, drawn in stark contrast, their edges curling as if touched by flame, their contents listing the weights of wheat sacks delivered to Ostia in 142 BCE. The senators drone on, their voices blending into a soothing hum like the rustle of parchment in a quiet archive. They discuss the formation of committees for aqueduct inspections, committees for festival planning, committees to oversee the committees. Each decision requires votes, records, and revisions, and the air grows heavy with the scent of ink and wax. Imagine the senators adjusting their togas, their movements slow and deliberate as the chamber fills with the soft scratching of quills on papyrus. Let your mind drift, your thoughts soften, as the monotony of their debates carries you closer to rest. Now, let us turn to the arena where gladiators fought, though not always with the flair of modern tales. Picture a high contrast illustration, the Colosseum looming under a gray sky, its arches drawn with thick black outlines against a white background. The gladiators, their faces weary yet expressive in that vintage folk art style, stand in muted tones of terracotta, charcoal, and dusty red. One holds a dented shield, its surface scratched from countless bouts. Another grips a chipped gladius, its blade dulls system, dulled by use. Their postures are rigid, almost ceremonial, as if posing for an ancient educational relief. The crowd, a mass of indistinct faces in muted earthy tones, watches from the stands, their cheers muffled by the weight of routine. The fights were often brief, the outcomes predetermined by skill or chance, but the preparations were exhaustive. Consider the retiarius, a net-wielding gladiator, whose equipment was subject to strict regulations. His net, for instance, was inspected for proper mesh size, as recorded in a faded scroll from 139 BCE. The gladiator's training was relentless, with logs detailing hours of repetitive drills. Swing the sword, thrust the spear, dodge the blow, repeat. The arena's sand was raked smooth each morning, a task assigned to low-ranking workers whose names were never recorded. The ledgers, stored in dusty vaults, tracked every win, loss, and injury, with entries like Marcus the Thracian, sprained ankle, 141 BCE. Picture the gladiators trudging back to their cells after a match, their footsteps echoing in the stone corridors, a rhythmic lulling sound like a distant drum. The arena, for all its spectacle, was a place of routine, of endless maintenance and paperwork. Imagine the Colosseum at dusk, its stark outlines softening in the fading light, the air heavy with dust and silence. Let that silence envelop you, your breathing slowing as the weight of history presses gently down. Let us now consider the libraries of Rome, or rather, their frequent destruction, a tragedy that was all too common. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a pile of scrolls engulfed in flames, drawn in muted oranges and yellows against a white background. The fire's thick black outlines frame the chaos, while a librarian, his face a mask of despair in vintage folk art style, clutches a single scroll. The scroll, perhaps detailing the grain shipments of 142 BCE, is half charred, its text fading into ash. Such fires were not always the work of invaders. Often, a stray lamp, a careless servant, or a poorly stored brazier was to blame. The loss was profound, or so the scribes would claim, as they mourned the destruction of tax records, legal codes, and lists of temple offerings. The process of rewriting was arduous. Hours spent copying faded texts, recalculating sums, and verifying dates. Picture the scribes, their togas smudged with ink, hunched over desks in a crumbling temple, its columns drawn in stark contrast, cracked and weathered by time. The temple's moody landscape, with its jagged stones and barren hills, stretches into the distance, bathed in muted grays and browns. The scribe's quills scratch softly, a steady, hypnotic sound, like rain on a tiled roof. They write of mundane matters, the cost of marble for a statue, the schedule for a festival, the inventory of sacrificial lambs. Each scroll is sealed with wax, stamped with a sigil, and filed in a vault, only to be forgotten. The temple's shadows grow longer, the air cooler, and your thoughts grow softer, drifting like leaves on a quiet stream. We turn now to the public executions, a grim but routine spectacle in Rome's forms. Imagine a high contrast scene, the crowd a sea of faces, each drawn with thick outlines and muted earthy tones. Their expressions in that vintage folk art style range from mild curiosity to weary indifference, for executions were as common as market days. The condemned, perhaps a thief named Titus, or a disgraced official like Gaius Verus, stands on a wooden platform, his toga tattered, his fate sealed by a lengthy trial. The trial records stored in dusty archives are a labyrinth of charges, witnesses, and procedural notes. One document, dated 143 BCE, lists the witnesses' names, their occupations, mostly merchants and scribes, and their statements, which repeat the same accusations with slight variations. The execution itself was brief. A rope tightened, a blade dropped, but the preparations were endless. Ropes were measured to precise lengths, scaffolds inspected for stability, schedules drawn and redrawn. The executioner, a minor official with a title like Carnifex Maximus, followed a strict protocol, as outlined in a scroll titled Procedures for Public Punishments, revised 140 BCE. Picture the forum, its cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of feet, surrounded by moody landscapes of crumbling temples and barren hills. The crowd's murmurs blend into a low drone, like waves lapping at a distant shore, steady and unchanging. The air is still, the scene frozen in time, and your eyelids grow heavier, your mind quieter, as the weight of Rome's history settles over you like a warm blanket. Let us linger on the temples of Rome, those grand but crumbling monuments to gods in glory. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a temple of Jupiter or Mars, its columns stark against a white background, their surfaces cracked and stained in muted grays, browns, and dusty reds. The temple's steps are worn, its altar chipped, its roof half collapsed, as if bowing to the passage of time. Priests in flowing robes, drawn in vintage folk art style, move slowly through the ruins, their faces solemn yet resigned. They carry out rituals that have not changed in centuries, lighting incense, chanting hymns, recording offerings in ledgers. One ledger, dated 138 BCE, lists the offerings for a single day: 10 lambs, 20 loaves of bread, 5 amphorae of wine, and a bundle of laurel leaves. The priests' duties were repetitive, their schedules rigid, their lives governed by tradition. The temple's moody landscape stretches beyond, with barren hills and twisted olive trees, their stark outlines fading into the distance. The air is heavy with the scent of myrrh and dust, and the priests' chants drone on, a soft rhythmic hum that blends with the rustle of their robes. The temple's shadows deepen, the light fades, and your thoughts grow faint, carried away by the gentle monotony of ritual. Now let us examine the maintenance of Rome's aqueducts, a task as vital as it was tedious. Picture a high contrast illustration, a long stone aqueduct stretching across a barren plain, its arches drawn with thick black outlines against a white background. Two inspectors in drab togas, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, walk along the structure carrying wax tablets. Their togas are colored in muted grays and ochres, smudged with dust from their endless treks. The aqueduct, rendered in dusty browns, shows cracks and moss, signs of slow decay. The inspectors note leaks, measure water flow, and record their findings in exhaustive detail, as seen in a scroll from 136 BCE listing Channel Section 4, minor seepage, repaired with lime. The process was repetitive. Walk, inspect, write, repeat, often under a scorching sun or cold wind. The aqueduct's moody landscape, with jagged hills and sparse shrubs, stretches into the distance, its stark outlines emphasizing isolation. The inspector's footsteps crunch softly, a rhythmic sound like a metronome, blending with the drip of water. Their reports pile up in Rome's archives, each one a catalog of mundane repairs, stones replaced, channels cleaned, disputes with local farmers over water rights. Imagine the inspectors pausing to adjust their sandals, their movements slow and deliberate, as the aqueduct looms silently above. Let the monotony of their task wash over you, your breathing slowing, your mind drifting into calm. We turn now to the grain dole, Rome's system of distributing free wheat to its citizens, a process mired in paperwork. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a crowded warehouse with thick black outlines, filled with sacks of grain in muted yellows and browns. Clerks in ink-stained togas, their faces bored yet expressive in vintage folk art style, sit at wooden desks, checking names against long scrolls. The scrolls, dated 141 BCE, list citizens eligible for the dole, their addresses, and the weight of grain issued. Details like Gaius Tullius, Vicus Tuscus, 5 modii. The clerk's work was relentless. Verify identities, weigh sacks, stamp receipts, all while citizens grumbled in long lines. The warehouse's air is thick with dust, its walls cracked, its moody backdrop a glimpse of crumbling tenements outside. The clerk's quills scratch steadily, a hypnotic sound like rustling leaves as they record every transaction. Errors meant audits, and audits meant more scrolls, as seen in a 140 BCE report correcting a shipment miscalculation. Picture the clerks rubbing their eyes, their togas sagging, as the line of citizens stretches on. The scene is unchanging, the air heavy, and your thoughts grow softer, lulled by the endless rhythm of bureaucracy. Let us consider the upkeep of Rome's roads, a task essential yet endlessly repetitive. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a dusty road stretching into a barren landscape, its cobblestones drawn with thick black outlines against a white background. A crew of workers in rough tunics, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, repairs a section, hauling stones in muted grays and browns. One worker, perhaps named Sextus, chips at a cobblestone, while another sweeps gravel, their movements slow and mechanical. The road's moody surroundings, jagged hills and sparse olive trees, fade into the distance, colored in dusty reds and ochres. The crew's logs, as recorded in a 139 BCE scroll, list tasks like Via Appia, mile marker 47, replaced 12 stones. The work was grueling, with quotas for stones laid daily, and disputes over pay were common, as noted in a faded complaint filed by a foreman. The workers' tools clink softly, a rhythmic sound like a distant hammer, blending with the rustle of wind. Imagine the crew pausing to wipe sweat from their brows, their tunics patched, as the road stretches endlessly ahead. Let the monotony of their labor settle over you, your eyelids growing heavier, your mind quieter. Now, we explore the work of Rome's tax collectors, a profession as unpopular as it was meticulous. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a narrow street in a Roman town, its buildings drawn with thick black outlines against a white background. A tax collector in a drab toga, his face stern yet tired in vintage folk art style, knocks on a door, holding a wax tablet. His toga is colored in muted olive and gray, his tablet listing names and sums owed, as seen in a 142 BCE record noting, Lucius alias 50 sesterces, paid late. The street's moody backdrop includes crumbling insulae and barren hills, rendered in dusty browns and reds. The collector's rounds were repetitive: knock, demand, record, move on, often facing insults or excuses. Disputes required hearings, and hearings produced more scrolls, like one detailing a 141 BCE case over a misreported vineyard yield. The collector's footsteps echo softly, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, blending with the murmur of the town. Picture him adjusting his toga, his tablet heavy with notes as the street stretches on. The scene is dull, the air still, and your thoughts drift, carried by the gentle drone of routine. Let us visit the port of Ostia, where clerks managed Rome's vital shipments, a task of endless paperwork. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a busy harbor with thick black outlines, ships unloading grain in muted yellows and browns. Clerks in togas, their faces bored in vintage folk art style, stand at docks, checking manifests on scrolls. The scrolls, dated 140 BCE, list cargo details like Ship Aurora, 200 amphorae of oil, inspected. The clerk's work was tedious. Tally barrels, verify seals, record weights, all under the cries of gulls and sailors. The harbor's moody backdrop includes crumbling warehouses and barren dunes, colored in grays and dusty reds. Errors meant delays, and delays meant reports, as seen in a 139 BCE scroll correcting a wine shipment. The clerk's quills scratch rhythmically, a soothing sound like waves lapping as they hunched over their desks. Imagine them pausing to adjust their lamps, their togas smudged as the harbor bustles on. Let the monotony of their task lull you, your breathing slowing, your mind easing. We turn now to the planning of Rome's festivals, a process more bureaucratic than festive. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a small office with thick black outlines, filled with scrolls and wax tablets. 3 planners in togas, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, sit at a table debating the Saturnalia schedule. Their togas are in muted ochres and grays, the scrolls listing details like 138 BCE, 500 loaves for public feast. The office's moody backdrop shows a glimpse of a crumbling temple through a window, colored in dusty browns. The planner's work was endless: allocate funds, hire musicians, inspect venues, all recorded in exhaustive detail. Disputes over budgets were common, as noted in a 141 BCE scroll resolving a flute player's pay. The planner's voices droned softly, a hypnotic hum like rustling parchment, as they argue over minor details. Picture them rubbing their temples, their togas sagging as the scrolls pile higher. The scene is static, the air heavy, and your thoughts grow softer, lulled by the rhythm of bureaucracy. Let us examine the paymasters of Rome's legions, whose work was as dull as it was critical. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a legion camp with thick black outlines, tents in muted grays and browns under a barren sky. 2 paymasters in togas, their faces stern in vintage folk art style, sit at a table counting coins and checking scrolls. The scrolls, dated 137 BCE, list soldiers' names and wages like Decimus Junius, 10 denarii paid. The paymaster's task was repetitive: verify service records, issue coins, record payments, often amid soldiers' complaints. The camp's moody landscape includes jagged hills and sparse shrubs, colored in dusty reds and ochres. Errors meant audits, and audits produce more scrolls, like one correcting a 138 BCE overpayment. The coins clink softly, a rhythmic sound like a distant bell, blending with the rustle of scrolls. Imagine the paymasters pausing to adjust their lamps, their togas dusty, as the camp hums quietly. Let the monotony of their work wash over you, your eyelids heavier, your mind calmer. Now, we consider the attendants of Rome's bathhouses, whose duties were routine yet essential. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a bathhouse with thick black outlines, its tiles in muted blues and grays. Two attendants in tunics, their faces bored in vintage folk art style, sweep floors and stoke fires, their tunics colored in dusty browns. The bathhouse's moody backdrop shows steam rising and cracked walls, with a glimpse of barren hills outside. The attendant's logs, as noted in a 140 BCE scroll, list tasks like hippocausts cleaned, 50 buckets of ash removed. Their work was repetitive: scrub tiles, refill oils, 10 furnaces, all amid the hum of bathers. Complaints about water temperature were common, as recorded in a faded report. The attendants' brooms swish softly, a hypnotic rhythm like waves blending with the crackle of fires. Picture them pausing to wipe sweat, their tunics damp, as the bathhouse steams on. The scene is unchanging, the air warm, and your thoughts drift, lulled by the gentle routine. Let us explore the work of Rome's land surveyors, a task of precision and monotony. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a rural field with thick black outlines divided by stone markers in muted grays. Two surveyors in togas, their faces focused in vintage folk art style, measure with rods, holding wax tablets. Their togas are in muted olives and browns, smudged with soil. The field's moody landscape includes barren hills and twisted trees, colored in dusty reds and grays. The surveyor's records, dated 142 BCE, list boundaries like Plot 47, 200 paces east, owned by Titus Flavius. Their work was tedious: measure, mark, record, resolve disputes, often trudging through mud. The rods tap softly, a rhythmic sound like a clock blending with the rustle of wind. Disputes filled scrolls, like one from 141 BCE over a mismeasured vineyard. Imagine the surveyors pausing to adjust their hats, their tablets heavy, as the field stretches on. Let the monotony of their task soothe you, your breathing slower, your mind quieter. Finally, we visit the keepers of Rome's archives, guardians of endless scrolls. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a vault with thick black outlines, shelves packed with scrolls in muted yellows and browns. Two keepers in togas, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, sort and label scrolls, their togas colored in grays and ochres. The vault's moody backdrop shows cracked walls and a glimpse of a crumbling temple outside in dusty reds. The keeper's logs, dated 139 BCE, list tasks like Shelf 4, reordered tax records, 142 to 140 BCE. Their work was relentless: catalog, file, retrieve, all in dim light. Errors meant searches, and searches produced more scrolls, like one correcting a 141 BCE misfiled decree. The keeper's footsteps shuffle softly, a hypnotic rhythm like rustling pages, blending with the creak of shelves. Picture them pausing to adjust their lamps, their togas dusty, as the vault looms silently. Let the monotony of their task envelop you, your thoughts fading, your mind at rest. Let us now turn to the market inspectors of Rome, tasked with ensuring order in the bustling forums. Picture a high contrast illustration, a crowded market stall lined with thick black outlines against a white background, laden with pottery and grain sacks in muted browns and yellows. Two inspectors in togas, their faces stern yet weary in vintage folk art style, examine a merchant's scales holding wax tablets. Their togas, colored in muted olives and grays, are dusted with market grime. The market's moody backdrop includes crumbling tenements and barren hills, rendered in dusty reds and ochres. The inspector's records, dated 143 BCE, list infractions like Publius the baker, short-weighted loaf, fine 5 sesterces. Their work was repetitive: check weights, measure goods, record violations, all amid the clamor of haggling. Disputes filled scrolls, such as one from 142 BCE over a spoiled fish batch. The inspector's footsteps shuffle through the crowd, a steady rhythm like a drum, blending with the murmur of voices. Picture them pausing to adjust their tablets, their togas frayed, as the market buzzes on. Let the monotony of their rounds soothe you, your breathing slowing, your mind drifting into calm. We explore now the census takers, who counted Rome's citizens with painstaking precision. Visualize a high contrast scene, a narrow street with thick black outlines, lined with insulates in muted grays and browns. Two census takers in togas, their faces focused in vintage folk art style, knock on doors, clutching scrolls. Their togas, in muted ochres and charcoals, are smudged with dust. The street's moody landscape includes cracked walls and barren hills, colored in dusty reds. The scrolls, dated 140 BCE, list names like Aulus Metellus, age 42, 2 children. The taker's work was tedious: knock, inquire, record, move on, often facing reluctant citizens. Errors meant recounts, and recounts produce more scrolls, like one correcting a 141 BCE household miscount. The taker's voices droned softly, a hypnotic hum like rustling leaves blending with the creak of doors. Imagine them pausing to adjust their sandals, their scrolls heavy, as the street stretches endlessly. The scene is dull, the air still, and your thoughts grow softer, lulled by the rhythm of routine. Let us consider the keepers of Rome's bridges, whose duties were as mundane as they were essential. Picture a high contrast illustration: a stone bridge over the Tiber with thick black outlines, its arches in muted grays and browns. Two keepers in tunics, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, sweep debris and check stones, their tunics in dusty olives. The bridge's moody backdrop includes barren riverbanks and twisted trees, colored in dusty reds and ochres. Their logs, dated 139 BCE, list tasks like Ponce Aemilius cleared 10 baskets of mud. The work was repetitive: sweep, inspect, repair, all amid the splash of the river. Complaints about tolls filled scrolls, like one from 140 BCE over a merchant's fee dispute. The keeper's brooms swish softly, a rhythmic sound like waves blending with the river's flow. Picture them pausing to wipe sweat, their tunics patched, as the bridge looms silently. Let the monotony of their task wash over you, your eyelids heavier, your mind quieter. Now, we turn to the cleaners of Rome's temples, tasked with maintaining sacred spaces. Visualize a high contrast scene: a temple interior with thick black outlines, its marble floor in muted grays and whites. Two cleaners in tunics, their faces bored in vintage folk art style, scrub steps and polish altars, their tunics in dusty browns. The temple's moody backdrop shows cracked columns and a barren hill outside, colored in dusty reds. Their logs, dated 138 BCE, list tasks like Temple of Vesta, swept 20 steps, polished 3 statues. The work was endless. Scrub, polish, sweep, all amid the hum of priests' chants. Complaints about dust were noted in a 141 BCE scroll. The cleaner's brushes scrape softly, a hypnotic rhythm like rain, blending with the rustle of their tunics. Imagine them pausing to adjust their tools, their faces weary, as the temple gleams dully. The scene is static, the air heavy, and your thoughts drift, lulled by the gentle routine. Let us examine the chariot repairers, who kept Rome's vehicles in order. Picture a high contrast illustration, a workshop with thick black outlines, filled with wooden chariots in muted browns and grays. 2 repairers in tunics, their faces focused in vintage folk art style, hammer wheels and Titan axles, their tunics in dusty ochres. The workshop's moody backdrop includes crumbling walls and barren hills, colored in dusty reds. Their records, dated 142 BCE, list repairs like Chariot 47, replaced left wheel, 10 nails used. Let us explore the clerks of Rome's wine merchants, who tracked every amphora. Picture a high contrast illustration, a shop with thick black outlines, shelves lined with amphorae in muted reds and browns. 2 clerks in togas, their faces bored in vintage folk art style, tally sales on wax tablets, their togas in muted olives and grays. The shop's moody backdrop includes crumbling insulae and barren hills, colored in dusty ochres. Their scrolls, dated 141 BCE, list sales like 50 amphorae, Falernian wine, sold to Lucius. The work was tedious. Count, record, seal, all amid the chatter of buyers. Errors meant recounts, like one in a 140 BCE scroll over a mislabeled shipment. The clerk's quills scratch rhythmically, a soothing sound like rustling leaves, blending with the clink of amphorae. Imagine them pausing to adjust their lamps, their togas smudged, as the shop bustles quietly. Let the monotony of their task lull you, your eyelids heavier, your mind calmer. Now we turn to the wardens of Rome's prisons, who guarded the city's captives. Visualize a high contrast scene, a dark cell block with thick black outlines, its stone walls in muted grays and browns. 2 wardens in tunics, their faces stern in vintage folk art style, patrol with torches, their tunics in dusty charcoals. The cell block's moody backdrop includes barred windows and barren hills outside, colored in dusty reds. Their logs, dated 139 BCE, list tasks like Cell 12, fed prisoner, 1 loaf. The work was repetitive. Patrol, feed, record, all amid the groans of captives. Complaints about conditions filled scrolls, like one from 140 BCE over a leaking roof. The warden's boots thud softly, a rhythmic sound like a heartbeat, blending with the flicker of torches. Picture them pausing to adjust their belts, their tunics worn, as the cell block looms silently. The scene is grim, the air heavy, and your thoughts drift, lulled by the routine. Let us consider the pressers of Rome's olive oil, a labor of endless repetition. Picture a high contrast illustration, a press yard with thick black outlines filled with stone presses in muted grays and browns. 2 pressers in tunics, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, turn cranks and stack olives, their tunics in dusty olives. The yard's moody backdrop includes barren hills and twisted trees, colored in dusty reds and ochres. Their logs, dated 142 BCE, list outputs like press 3, 20 amphorae of oil, 141 BCE. The work was grueling. Crush, press, bottle, all amid the scent of olives. Disputes over yields filled scrolls, like one from 141 BCE over a spoiled batch. The presses creak rhythmically, a hypnotic sound like a mill, blending with the rustle of leaves. Imagine the pressers pausing to wipe sweat, their tunics stained, as the yard hums quietly. Let the monotony of their labor soothe you, your breathing slowing, your mind quieter. Finally, we visit the night watchmen of Rome, who patrolled its silent streets. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a dark alley with thick black outlines, its walls in muted grays and browns. Two watchmen in cloaks, their faces vigilant yet tired in vintage folk art style, carry lanterns, their cloaks in dusty charcoals. The alley's moody backdrop includes crumbling insula and barren hills, colored in dusty reds. Their logs, dated 140 BCE, list patrols like Vicus Tuscus, no incidents, midnight. The work was repetitive. Walk, check, report, all amid the quiet of night. Reports of minor thefts filled scrolls, like one from 141 BCE over a stolen cloak. The watchman's boots tapped softly, a rhythmic sound like a clock, blending with the rustle of wind. Picture them pausing to adjust their lanterns, their cloaks heavy as the city sleeps. Let the monotony of their rounds envelop you, your thoughts fading, your mind at rest. Let us now turn to the scribes who recorded the speeches of Rome's forum orders, a task as tedious as it was meticulous. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a crowded forum with thick black outlines against a white background, where an orator in a toga gestures dramatically, colored in muted ochres and grays. Two scribes, their faces bored yet focused in vintage folk art style, sit nearby, scribbling on wax tablets. Their togas, in muted olives and charcoals, are smudged with ink. The forum's moody backdrop includes crumbling temples and barren hills, rendered in dusty reds and browns. The scribe's scrolls, dated 142 BCE, list speeches like Marcus Tullius, Speech on Grain Tariffs, 300 lines. Their work was relentless. Listen, write, revise, all amid the drone of orators' voices. Errors meant corrections, as noted in a 141 BCE scroll fixing a misquoted decree. The scribe's quills scratch softly, a hypnotic rhythm like rustling parchment, blending with the hum of the crowd. Picture them pausing to sharpen their quills, their togas sagging as the orator rambles on. Let the monotony of their task soothe you, your breathing slowing, your mind drifting into calm. We now explore the maintenance workers of Rome's Cloaca Maxima, the city's ancient sewer system. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a dark tunnel with thick black outlines, its stone walls in muted grays and browns, damp with moisture. Two workers in tunics, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, shovel debris and scrub walls, their tunics in dusty olives and charcoals. The tunnel's moody backdrop includes a glimpse of barren hills through a grate, colored in dusty reds. Their logs, dated 140 BCE, list tasks like Section 5, cleared 15 baskets of sludge. The work was grueling, shovel, scrub, haul, all amid the stench of the sewers. Complaints about blockages filled scrolls, like one from 141 BCE over a clogged drain. The workers' shovels scrape rhythmically, a soothing sound like a distant mill, blending with the drip of water. Imagine them pausing to wipe sweat, their tunics damp as the tunnel stretches on. The scene is grim, the air heavy, and your thoughts grow softer, lulled by the routine. Let us consider the cooks who prepared Rome's public feasts, a task of endless repetition. Picture a high-contrast illustration, a kitchen with thick black outlines, filled with clay ovens and pots in muted reds and browns. Two cooks in tunics, their faces tired in vintage folk art style, stir vats and knead dough, their tunics in dusty ochres. The kitchen's moody backdrop includes crumbling walls and a barren hill outside, colored in dusty grays. Their logs, dated 139 BCE, list tasks like Saturnalia feast, bake 200 loaves, boiled 50 vats of stew. The work was repetitive. Chop, stir, bake, all amid the heat of ovens. Disputes over supplies filled scrolls, like one from 140 BCE over a delayed grain delivery. The cook's spoons clink softly, a hypnotic rhythm like a clock, blending with the crackle of fires. Picture them pausing to wipe their brows, their tunics stained, as the kitchen hums quietly. Let the monotony of their labor soothe you, your eyelids heavier, your mind calmer. Now, we turn to the specters of Rome's city walls, who ensured their stability. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a section of the Servian wall with thick black outlines, its stones in muted grays and browns, cracked by time. Two inspectors in togas, their faces stern in vintage folk art style, examine stones and take notes on wax tablets, their togas in muted olives and grays. The wall's moody backdrop includes barren hills and twisted trees, colored in dusty reds and ochres. Their records, dated 142 BCE, list tasks like Section 3, repaired 10 stones, mortar applied. The work was tedious. Inspect, measure, record, all amid the wind and dust. Disputes over repairs filled scrolls, like one from 141 BCE over a contractor's shoddy work. The inspector's tools tapped softly, a rhythmic sound like a hammer, blending with the rustle of wind. Picture them pausing to adjust their tablets, their togas dusty, as the wall looms silently. The scene is unchanging, the air heavy, and your thoughts drift, lulled by the routine. Finally, we visit the keepers of Rome's public gardens, who tended to the city's greenery. Visualize a high-contrast scene, a garden with thick, black outlines, its paths lined with sparse shrubs and muted greens and browns. Two keepers in tunics, their faces weary in vintage folk art style, prune branches and sweet paths, their tunics in dusty olives. The garden's moody backdrop includes crumbling statues and barren hills, colored in dusty reds and grays. Their logs, dated 140 BCE, list tasks like Garden of Lucullus, trim 20 shrubs, swept. And so, we leave the Roman Empire, its shadows and whispers fading into the quiet of the night. The senators, the gladiators, the scribes, the crowds, the priests, and the countless workers, all part of a vast, monotonous tapestry, woven with the threads of time. Picture one final scene, a crumbling temple under a starless sky, its columns stark against a white background, its stones bathed in muted grays and browns. The empire endures, but its stories grow soft, their edges blurred by the weight of centuries. The air is still, the world silent, and the heavy mantle of history wraps around you, warm and comforting. Let your breathing slow, your mind ease, and the gentle rhythm of the past carry you gently to sleep. Good night.